Welcome to this special edition of the New Stack Makers on the Road. We're here at HashiCorp Global in beautiful Los Angeles, California. Discussions with technologists giving you their expertise and insights to help you with your everyday work. Infrastructure enables innovation. HashiCorp provides consistent workflows to provision, secure, connect, and run any infrastructure for any application.
Hello, and welcome to another on-the-road episode of the New Stacks Makers podcast. We're coming to you from beautiful, sunny downtown Los Angeles, California at HashiConf Global, which is HashiCorp's user conference. I'm Heather Joslyn, the features editor of the New Stack. Today we'll be sharing with you a case study about the use of HashiCorp's Nomad, which is a workload scheduler and orchestrator for containerized and non-containerized applications, and particularly the challenges and solutions involved in scaling Nomad. We'll talk about how SeatGeek, a mobile application that serves as a primary and secondary market for event tickets, used Nomad and how its engineers interacted with deployments and how it worked alongside SeatGeek's best organizational practices in terms of scaling and security. Our conversation today is brought to you by HashiCorp, makers of Terraform, Vault, Consul, Nomad, and other solutions for consistent cloud operations. We're joined today by Jose Diaz-Gonzalez, staff engineer at SeatGeek. Welcome, Jose.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at SeatGeek?
I currently work on our release engineering team, so that's basically managing the lifecycle of an application and how it comes from an engineer's laptop into CI/CD and then inevitably in front of our customers and what that experience looks like, both once it's delivered as well as like what the engineer interacts with and how they support that application.
So you see the whole life cycle of the application. My understanding is that SeatGeek was started about, and that it's if for those who you probably are very familiar with SeatGeek, our audience, telling people in our audience if you've bought tickets to a Broadway show, if you've bought tickets to a football game, a soccer game, you probably have used SeatGeek at some point. My understanding is that the company started about 13 years ago.
Something like that. It was 2010.
Okay.
2009, 2010.
Okay. And can you sketch in for us a little bit SeatGeek's relationship to the cloud and was it always on the cloud, for example?
Yeah, when we started, I would say the cloud offerings were very immature in comparison to today. We used essentially everything that was on AWS, but that was like 4 things at the time. And so, since then we've been, slowly adopting newer technologies, newer frameworks, patterns, that sort of thing as they come up.
Okay. And then just to give us a sense of the scale in the environment that your developers were deploying into. You mentioned it was kind of homogeneous, the environment.
Yeah, that's correct. We, on the back office for our partners, the Dallas Cowboys, the Saints, that sort of thing, we provide them with something like a software as a service, right? Mm-hmm. And so all of those installations, they're single tenant, but they run roughly the same way for every single customer.
Okay.
And then on the consumer side, we run a ton of different services and microservices and that sort of thing. And those run while they're in different languages or frameworks, they run in basically the same exact way. So largely the same patterns if you're on one side of the business or the other.
Okay. And do you deploy to multiple clouds or just?
We're mostly on AWS. We deploy to Windows and Linux containers on the enterprise side, Windows, and on the consumer side, Linux. And then we deploy to both US and EU regions as well.
Okay. So I guess we'll start talking about Nomad. What is Nomad?
For us, Nomad's a container. Well, it's a workload scheduler, right? So we use that to provide services to our engineering teams and to other folks. Maybe they have like jobs that they need to run in a certain period of time, or they need to run them ad hoc, or things that are persistent. And so, we use that to provide basically the entire orchestration layer for our deployments, whether that's on the Windows side for enterprise customers or the more traditional Linux-based applications.
Do you use Kubernetes at all, or no?
No, we do not, and that's kind of unfortunate for us because we see in a lot of cases, folks say, "Well, do you support Kubernetes?" Yes. Do you have Kubernetes as a vendor? And we'll say no. So we need to figure out creative ways to make the relationship work there for whatever it is.
Yeah. Have you felt are some of the trade-offs in terms, other than you mentioned the vendor issue, but
It's a much smaller community. So, if we need support, we lean heavily on HashiCorp Enterprise, and we lean on the support team to answer questions. But if we need support on making some particular change or using some certain feature, we might be one of the few people starting to use that feature. So the community is much smaller. But that said, it's much easier for us to manage and support Nomad and its integration with the rest of our platform because it's so simple to run. So it's a bit of good and bad.
Yeah. And you can run containers and non-containerized applications.
That's correct, right? We've used it for running IIS workloads directly on Windows. We've used it for raw execution jobs that are directly on the host. Of course, we use it for container-based workloads, etc.
So you began using Nomad, and what were the problems that you were looking for it to solve for you?
Yeah, I think in the beginning we had a platform that an engineer would deploy something to, but it was very constrained. We only gave them a certain number of options that they could use. It was very static experience. If they want to scale an application, it required manual toil on the platform team side, and then they can do some work. And so for us, we wanted to expose more of the platform to engineers and allow them to have more control over what it is that they were shipping, how that runtime environment was executed, and how they scaled their applications.
What have been some of the challenges that you encountered as you've been using, as you started to use Nomad in terms of, for example, deployment? Were there things that you needed to do so that your teams could work
more efficiently?
Yeah.
I think the big thing for us is sort of like applying policies or whether that's a security or like an audit policy that says you can't do X, you can't perform X operation, or this operation is the only safe way to do something. That sort of stuff has been a little bit more difficult for us to do. There have been tools and features that Nomad has provided over the years, but really early on that was a problem for us.
Yeah, but it sounds like they're
it's more or less solved for us at this point, right?
What about were there other challenges that you had to? I remember I went to your talk earlier today, and there was talk about the teams creating some things to help.
One of the things for us was trying to find what the best dividing line is for the platform, right? Nomad's very powerful and allows you to pretty much do whatever you need to do in order to get your job running and your workload in front of your customers. But there's a lot of knobs for folks to tweak and turn. And so what we wanted to do was make sure we were providing the right knobs for folks so that we weren't inundating them with options, and also providing that best practice experience around deployments and making it simpler and that sort of thing.
There was a mention of a deli.
Yeah, we have we build a couple of different tools internally. So there's the UI is called Deli, short for delivery. You can go in and kind of pick your environment, whether that's a production environment, a pre-production environment. Pick your application, pick a particular version of the app that you want to deploy, and get it deployed in front of customers.
You mentioned that also in the talk that you'd asked your teams for feedback, and what was some of the feedback that you received, and how did it change how you worked with Nomad?
Yeah, again, going back to providing a simple interface for things. As an engineer, you're probably spending a minimal amount of time in the deployment world, right? You're mostly working on the product that you're building and how to deliver it. And so every 3 months you go into this config file and you find it's 80 lines and you copy it from here to here, and maybe you forget a line or two. And that was a big concern for our engineers, is like, what do I need to configure, and like what can I like leave apart? So that's really something that we focused on, is removing that extra configuration they may not have needed, or that was kind of standard across the board.
Okay. So making it a little more, like, again, fewer options, more
convention over configuration.
Yeah. Were there other best practices that you that you had to adapt Nomad to?
I don't know if this is necessarily Nomad, but there's a lot of in many cases where we were deploying something from a vendor, for instance, or from a third party, where it wasn't really adapted to the cloud. Those are things that like you couldn't potentially put in a container, or was much harder to do. Those were things that were, if we had been in a pure container world, if we were on ECS or Kubernetes, for instance, we would have had a rough time. But with Nomad, we were allowed to sort of step outside of the box and do that directly on the host when necessary.
Mm-hmm. What about security issues? Were there any new security challenges that either using Nomad or using integrating it with the rest of your?
Definitely not anything introduced by Nomad, but certainly there are things where, you know, we, especially on the policy side, where we don't want to allow folks to do something insecure,
right? And
so we're going to grab that ahead of time. I think like those were and still remain big concerns of our security team. Mm-hmm. You know, how do we safely expose the runtime environment, and how do we allow engineers to have as much access as possible without, you know, giving them the keys to the kingdom and potentially breaking things.
Yeah. There's, and also with what your company does, you have people are buying tickets.
Yeah.
They're giving you their credit card numbers and so on. So
yeah, you definitely, like, one thing we want to avoid is, you know, we have a fairly flat internal organization, fairly open access to a lot of things, but we want to make sure that if you buy a ticket to the Super Bowl, those tickets are yours. Like we've been guaranteed that no one in our organization has access to them. Mm-hmm. And so those are the kind of the challenges that we have internally, making sure that at a security level, folks are not accessing things that they shouldn't be accessing. Mm-hmm. And if they do have access, that we audit it, that sort of thing.
I wanted to go back to a little bit about the building things internally. Like you mentioned that's a benefit. If you're going to be in your presentation, you mentioned that's a benefit. Are you able to like offer feedback to Nomad about, to the company about?
Oh, yeah, no,
thing?
Definitely. We're constantly giving them feedback on their tooling and how it integrates with our systems and what we're trying to see in the future. So, they have features such as like auto scaling. So, how do we debug that, and how do we ensure that, the policy that we've applied for scaling a particular part of our stack is actually what has executed, and when did it execute? That sort of thing we constantly are funneling back, and they're building into the platform.
Are there any challenges around scaling, or has it gone pretty smoothly? Like if you have a big tour is announced or something, or World Series tickets. Or
knock on wood,
tickets.
Because we have on sales all the time. Yeah. There's certainly challenges every now and then when we see, for instance, a very high performing concert come in, and we're not really clear. We scale up preemptively. We know that that's coming. Mm-hmm. For the most part, we're not like sort of on demand scaling. We know that those events are coming. We know that there's an on sale at 11 a.m. tomorrow for whoever it is. Yeah. So we need to be prepared ahead of time versus acting reactively in a sense.
What do you sort of wish you'd known at the beginning of this journey with Nomad that you know now, or that you might advise people who are looking into this as a solution for orchestration? The sort of advice you might give them.
Yeah, I think I would have wished I'd had a better grasp of the types of workloads that we ran. Mm-hmm. They were like, now that we've built over the past 5-6 years, we know that most of our workloads are relatively the same. They're all homogeneous. Everyone runs roughly the same thing. And so we didn't necessarily need all of the features that the platform that Nomad provides us. Mm-hmm. And so if we had constrained it better, we would have had a much smoother experience, I think.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Jose. We really enjoyed hearing about your SeatGeek's journey with Nomad and how you've made it really work for your company. This has been an on-the-road edition of the New Stack Makers. I'm Heather Joslyn, and we'll see you next time.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.